I'm Audra Jenkins, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of Randstad North America. Today, we've got two phenomenal speakers I'm so excited to have here. First is the amazing Aleta Howell with Cisco. She's the Global Diversity and Inclusion Strategy Lead. She's responsible for aligning corporate and functional ED&I strategies, creating internal programs and initiatives that drive diverse and inclusive hiring. Prior to her current role, she also led the Cisco Inclusive Recruiting Strategy for the University Recruiting and served as the program manager for Cisco's Office of Inclusion and Collaboration, where she created the new processes to drive diversity metrics, reviews, and discussions with senior leaders. She's a strong advocate and champion of ED&I and has a wonderful career that spans across multiple industries. A fun fact about Aleta is that she's a former spelling bee champion, loves to write, and spend time at the beach in her spare time. Welcome, Aleta.
So much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Aleta. Next, we have the absolutely amazing Stanley Blackwell with Gilead Sciences. He's the executive director, head of U.S. talent acquisition, and he's also responsible for creating the vision, strategy, roadmap for talent acquisition across the U.S., TA, enterprise-wide sourcing, early talent, universe relations, and diversity sourcing recruitment. With more than 25 years of experience, Stan excels at building and leading high-performing talent acquisition teams with the successful pursuit of diversifying global organizations. In 2021, Stan helped to spearhead the commitment that Gilead made to the 110 initiative, which is backed internally by the company's Advancing Black Leadership Strategy. A fun fact about Stan is he was offered a full scholarship to play college baseball and turned it down. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you, Audra. Good to be with you.
Excellent. So let's talk about some of the topics. We've got several topics to jump in here today. I won't read all of these. We're just going to jump straight into the first one. The first topic is on building equity, diversity, inclusion in your talent strategy. So, Aleta, let's start with you. When we look at the impact over the last 18 months, all of us as ED&I practitioners, we've definitely had to pivot our ED&I goals during this pandemic. How has your ED&I strategy was built into your talent strategy overall, especially during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I like to think of our the talent strategy component of ED&I at Cisco as really an evolution. It's a bit of a continuum. So I think if I look back, I've been in this space at Cisco for the past 7 or 8 years. And so if I look at where we started, it was really a focus on diversity, right? Diversity, reporting data to the EOC and that kind of thing. And then we evolved into the space of diversity and inclusion. And it sort of focused on creating some best practices that we could then expand. And now, of course, we are focused on inclusion and collaboration. And I really think about as the talent market shifts, I feel like we're just at another place in that continuum. Foundational to our talent strategy has really been, and I know we're going to probably talk about this a little bit more, but really has been focused on data. And that's we're taking data, sharing that with leaders, showing them what their organizations look like from a diversity perspective, showing them what it looks like in terms of representation, but also looking at attrition data. And that sort of sometimes aligns with inclusion, right? People leave jobs oftentimes because they don't feel that it's an inclusive culture, inclusive environment. And so using that data to inform our strategies, looking at where gaps are, looking at what we think we can achieve, right? We can't achieve everything in 1 year. So how do we align strategies and create programs to attract more female talent or more ethically diverse talent? And then, of course, as we think about the past 18 months with the Great Resignation, that's really forced us. I feel like at Cisco, we partnered. You mentioned the 110 Coalition, and some other programs that focus on skills-based hiring. And I think Cisco and other companies, I think it's an opportunity for us to really rethink about how we're hiring and really lean into that space. I think to me, it's just the next step on the continuum as we think about what's probably taken place in the past 18 months.
Absolutely, Aleta. It's definitely not a destination, it's a journey, and very strong points there. Stan, just to piggyback on that, Aleta raised a great point about the Great Resignation, and also, on top of that, it's a great gender recession. We've seen people to really reevaluate what's important in their lives right now and their careers, and they're opting for different choices. How has your strategy been impacted or changed as a result of talent scarcity challenges brought on by the pandemic as well as the Great Resignation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, even before the pandemic in organizations like Gilead that hire a specialized workforce, it's tough all the time when you think of those, competitive roles, you think of those highly specialized backgrounds that you need and when you need them. And then you think about the diversity that exists or does not exist in those various areas. So from a TA perspective, what is the burden on that proactive sourcing engine that needs to always be going in order to meet the need of the organization's goals related to diversity and inclusion? And, for us, I think one of the things that has really helped, is the Blueprint for Change at Gilead today, which is a program that really creates the opportunity when you think of the investments that each of our organizations make, for example, with diversity career events that happen a lot of times in Q3 and Q4 of the year, you find that most of that headcount is gone. And so how and why are you showing up, turns into branding your organization versus really hiring talent. And through our program, it just provides headcount, when we need it to hire top talent, wherever it sits in the organization or in the US for that matter. We've got multiple locations, multiple sites, and we do leave that hiring decision obviously with the managers in terms of where that talent will reside, but that flexibility is something that we continue to monitor and make available because as you all know, when you look at the diversity data numbers that have come out this month, a lot of companies' diversity representation numbers would fail had it not been for flexible locations. And so we hope that will continue to play a part, in how we think about our teams and the representation that we all seek.
Excellent point, Stan. I couldn't agree more on that. That's a great segue to our next set of questions around workforce planning in complex changing environments. I really think that, Aleta, looking, at those questions, I feel as though really have got to get back to looking at how we leverage that data and how does that play it with the emerging talent pools. I mean, you did share, you talked about partnering closely and looking at emerging and raw talent, but what other ways are you looking at, or how are you using data to position that talents for hiring managers?
Yeah, I would say that, in terms of the emerging talent, there's a lot of data out there in terms of, unemployment rates, in terms of talent that's available. And again, if you look at the number of folks that have left the workforce, again, with the Great Resignation, I think the number's around 4 million or so. And so looking at that data, because I think if you think about especially in let's just take the university space, a lot of students have opted not to enter, in the past year in particular, have opted not to enter traditional four-year universities. And so we may not see that impact today, but I think we will see that impact in probably a couple of years from now. So that workforce is starting to tighten. And I think that leads to programs like, when you look at the available talent market, it may not be the traditional talent that we have historically hired in terms of, for us, talent with a four-year degree. And so I think it forces us to rethink what qualified talent looks like. What do you really need to be for a candidate or an employee to be successful in a particular role? And so we've gone through that process in the past, over the past 6 months. I mean, in a huge way, because I mentioned the 110 Coalition, which is an initiative that is focused on upskilling and reskilling a million African Americans without four-year degrees in the next 10 years. So Cisco and Gilead both are founding members of that. And so that's a huge talent pool that's out there, that it's available. But the reality is that if we're going to think about skills-based hiring and think about talent pools that are available there that we can tap into, we also have to rethink about how we hire and how we identify what we call qualified talent. We need to think about, interviewing and adding talent for cultural add versus cultural fit. And, encouraging hiring managers to not think about the sort of laundry list of 15 skills that I'd love to have, but what are the core qualifications that you really need for somebody to be successful? And then I also think it takes a larger commitment for hiring managers to be willing to pour a bit more into developing their talent. So it's not just I come to the table with, ready-made to walk in the door and be able to do 150% of the job. To me, it forces hiring managers to almost think about developing stronger partnerships with their employees and thinking about how you can develop talent versus sort of the traditional, talent walking in the door being necessarily job ready.
That's an excellent point, Talita. Stan, along those lines, I keep thinking with COVID-19, we also saw a pandemic within a pandemic with a shift in focus on social justice following the 2020 death of George Floyd. With all of our companies being members of 110, the 110 Coalition, what are some other ways that we can use the data about these type of initiatives and the current climate to make those decisions, to make those commitment levels? I mean, there surely had to be. I mean, obviously, Cisco and Gilead both were, founding members and, made very bold, decisions early on. Randstad, we joined in 2021. Um, what are some of those metrics that you're using to help make those decisions, to help to guide your leaders into making those commitment levels and to remove those barriers to that skills first hiring emerging talent?
Sure, Audra. I think that two ways that I would approach kind of that question. I think, at a high level, I would just remind us, there was a great diversity study in 2016 that showed diverse teams outperformed homogeneous teams by 25%. The diverse teams came to the table more prepared to deal with disagreements that they would expect to get. But through that wrestling, ideas, were comprehensive and creative versus those homogeneous teams that showed more groupthink, spending less time in ideation, and came up with the likely obvious solutions to a problem. And so when you think of, what the impact can be that diverse teams can have on an organization, I think that's the first data point would be kind of that, that corporate goal. And I think anyone, who is, whether you're a P&L owner or whether you're a contributor to a P&L, cost savings or value capture, wherever you are on that continuum, there's a place for that example in terms of how we can, show up from a diverse and well-represented workforce. But from a hiring manager perspective on the 110 topic, I think we just have to really help them understand what is not changing when you're removing a degree requirement. What's not changing is that we are hiring the best candidate for the position. That's not changing. And I think in any change initiative, that's something we forget to remind the stakeholders of what is not changing. But what is changing is the net that we're casting, broader, wider, deeper, to get talent that we could need now in the future that could help shape innovation for the organization. And we may not start off by removing a degree requirement from every single role, but we can certainly look at, where we can start to have that conversation and then build on it based on the needs of the organization, based on data, that we bring to the table for hiring managers. Because a lot of times, if our competitors are doing something, they want to know about it. So I think the 110 initiative really allows us to fiercely compete for talent. And if one organization is doing something and another organization is not doing it, then who's getting the net benefit and the competitive advantage, through holistically looking at the talent pool that can be meaningful to the success of an organization.
And can I add something to that, Audra?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
from a social justice perspective in particular, it really, 110, when we first approached and started building out our framework, and then I went to start talking and socializing the initiative with our leaders. One of the things that came out of those conversations was how 110 and other initiatives like it can be a part of strategy. So it's not just we're going to hire individuals in a certain talent pool. It's a part of our diversity strategy. And to Stan's point, oftentimes, or there are times when within the context of a diversity conversation, it leads some to think that we are sacrificing quality, right? We're not. It doesn't mean sacrificing quality. It means that we're looking into tapping into a different talent pool. And I feel like if those of us in this business don't get out there now, we're going to get left behind, because there are companies that are going to compete. This is the way that we're going to have to compete for talent as we move forward, again, within a shrinking talent market. And then the last point I'll add is I was reading an article the other day from Harvard Business Review, and it talked about when you think about skills with hiring, one of the best indicators of success is grit, tenacity, the willingness to get in there and learn and do make it happen. And so I think when you think about skills-based hiring, one of the things that I've learned with the talent, we're onboarding 30 new hires through 110, actually next Tuesday. And one of the common threads that I would say I've seen in the folks that I've interviewed and the folks that I've interacted with is grit. They have grit. They have tenacity because it's an opportunity that maybe some folks would have otherwise not have had, and now they really appreciate that opportunity. Maybe more so than some of us who might take those opportunities for granted. So I think it's something that companies really need to lean into from a talent market perspective. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind.
That's powerful, Alita. I love that, the grit and tenacity to get it done because, when you have no other choice, you just have to be successful. And I think that people look at that emerging talent and like this is their choice. And they also will be loyal because you invested in them. I really think that's something people overlook is it's a great retention tool because they now have a career with a company they would not have otherwise been able to get into.
Yeah.
Everybody would love to work at Cisco and Gilead. Excellent point. Let's move on, guys, as we go to the next topic. I know we want to talk about shifting. We talked a lot about shifting and defining talent. Alita, you mentioned it. Stan, you did as well. But the other piece of it is that I think it's that change management piece. So let's talk about it. Alita, one of the bottlenecks is we hear is, we can't meet our diversity talent goals. It's just we don't know where to find the talent. How is Cisco shifting that way? Like, how were they? I know you talked about the 110 initiative and 30 people you're onboarding, but what did it take to shift that thought process and the hiring managers to give this a try?
Yeah, I think it goes back to sort of that evolution and that continuum that I talked about. And I think it starts at the top. It starts with leader and executive commitment and reiterating and reinforcing, here's what we're going to do. So our mission is to create an inclusive future for all. And then those messages can't just stop at the top. They need to be pushed down and, throughout an organization. And that does take time. In terms of, prior to 110, we had started to lean in more in terms of recruiting at historically Black colleges and universities, right? So a few years ago, we probably had a presence at, I don't know, 3 or 4, and now that's expanded to twice that, about 8 or 9 schools. Plus, we do digital sourcing, so we found opportunities to do digital sourcing at historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions. We've strengthened our investment in different recruiting platforms that focus on diverse talent, conferences. So we've employed a number of different elements there and just continue to keep it top of mind in our conversations. When we have our quarterly business reviews with leaders, I'm at the table talking to leaders about their organizations. They don't like to see those gaps in representation and maybe what their talent pools should look like. So then those leaders get engaged. I think to me, that is the number one driver. Managers,
Yeah.
It's great to have them, they eventually have to, they're the boots on the ground that have to execute, but the leaders need to continue to reinforce it. And honestly, I feel because we did a lot of that work prior to 110, when the 110 opportunity became available and I started doing the road shows, people just got it. I honestly, it was so much easier to have the conversation around 110 and how that could be included as a part of different leaders' diversity strategy. It was much easier than I thought. In fact, if I look at our 110 demand for this fiscal year, the vast majority of that is in engineering, if you can believe that, in engineering, which is amazing to me. And that's just because the leaders understand what it is we're trying to do and understand that long-term mission.
Excellent. Stan, just to piggyback on what Alita just said, with Gilead being in a biopharma, was it more challenging to shift a mindset to look at how we redefine talent at Gilead?
Yeah, I think in some areas, yes, because, this is still a highly specialized sector, within the market. And when you think of folks that have been at an organization for 15 and 20 years plus, there's a mindset that is there. And so when you think about that, I mean, you really have to bring everything to the table in terms of value proposition, the market data, and really helping a leader understand, how he or she will achieve their objectives, in the current state versus the future state. And I do think it will be an evolution dependent upon the function, the leader. It's an individual conversation. And it's a personal conversation as well, because change is personal. And this is really what we're, engaging from a TA perspective. We are in the throes of change management for the organization. We're leading it, we're driving it, sometimes with help, sometimes without help. And it all rests on our shoulders sometimes in terms of, how it lands and the outcomes that are attributed through that. So I do think, we just need to keep on, showing our leaders the ways at which they can achieve the goal. And again, back to what I said previously, emphasizing what's not changing. What's not changing is that we are hiring the best candidate for the position. We wouldn't do that any other way and still be a market leader. But it is, how many folks have we not considered that could have contributed to the success of the organization? And even from a productivity perspective, we know the cost of a bad hire, how much that costs, and how much and how long it takes for someone to make the turn in their role when you have to refill that position. And I think that's where you really can have those strategic conversations about, do you need 100% of the job description, or can you live with 70 and build on the 30? And that 30% that you're building on could provide the runway that an organization needs to engage the talent, develop the talent, and hopefully get a longer term investment in the end.
It's almost like Batman and Robin, right? Do you need Batman or can Robin do the job? I mean, you can't, do you really need that gold medalist? Maybe a silver medalist might be sufficient for the role. And people kind of overlook the silver medalist because they might come in and crush it. So
Totally,
exactly,
Audra. And what do you need with 20 Batmans, right? I mean, how are you going to
exactly,
keep them here?
That's exactly.
exactly.
Yeah, I was going to add one thing too. I think of it as almost like a house, right? I think the foundational elements are key. And I think if a company can set strong foundational elements, then when you look down the road 5 years, leaders, you put leaders in a position where they seek your consult. And then it's like, what can we do next? Oh, that worked. What can we do next? Oh, that worked. What else can we do? And so now you're in this, I'm using some probably bad metaphors, but you feel like you're in this bus together and everybody's moving in the same direction. You keep picking up people as you go along. But I think the foundation is key.
Absolutely. And it's always evolving. So thank you
Yeah,
for that. That's a
sure.
great segue to the next questions around culture and how we can ensure that we are building a culture that's inclusive, for people and that they will stay there. So as we shift to the next questions around inclusive path, I want to say, starting with Stan, let's start with you. One of the biggest myths of diverse recruiting is that you can hire that targeted demographic and leave them at the door when they join. But we all know, especially EDI practitioners and specialists, that diverse talent equally want and desire a development, growth, and a career path. So, how are you developing diverse talent during the onboarding process and beyond at Gilead?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, for us today, we do have a strong partnership with our talent management team. And so I mentioned a project, Blueprint for Change, but then we've been talking about 110. And then we have Advancing Black Leadership, which is kind of the all-encompassing strategy that our organization has for our diverse talent strategy. And what I would say is that at every area on that map and journey, there is a talent management connection. We're building it while we're going, but that doesn't mean that we need to just let it kind of sit while we recruit and let folks land and roll. But how do you insulate that talent, and how do you support that talent in the interim? And that's what we're doing now. Thankfully, we've got a fully built talent management team. We've gone through some change in the organization, like any organization that is building, rebuilding, but certainly we are partners, in how we kind of weave that connectivity between talent acquisition and talent management. And then I would also say that the evolving role of an ERG partner is also critical in how we position them to be successful. A lot of time ERGs want to know, what can we do to support hiring initiatives and recruitment initiatives? And so we've got a great plan for them as they can be talent ambassadors for those folks that are on the bench. How do we create routines and rhythms of conversation that happen from the time we get to know them, from the time that we hire them? Sometimes that might be 30 days. It could be 60 days, it could go beyond, but they have a contact before they're a hire at Gilead. So we're thinking differently about how do we evolve and engage the partnership with our ERGs, because they are, the feet on the street as well, and they can bring a lot of practicality to how individuals are thinking about where they go next. And if they could help us with that, TA will take whatever help we can get.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Stan. Alita, at Cisco, what similar programs do you have that's ensuring those inclusion checkpoints for diverse talent once they're hired, so they feel like they're moving along in the throes and growing within Cisco?
Yeah, I would agree with Stan. We call them EROs, so employee resource organizations, but I think they are key in helping to onboard, to engage potential candidates when they're going through the process. Hopefully, even to help us close. Our EROs in particular, our Connected Black Professionals organization, our Connexion organization, actually have their own sort of professional development initiatives, speaker series. There's mentoring, there's reverse mentoring. So there's a lot of different programs that we put in place to support from an ERO perspective. We've also I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, a really formalized sponsorship program, executive sponsorship. So getting execs engaged to sponsor diverse talent, female talent, because we know the stats there as well. We talked about data earlier. We know the stats there in terms of the unlikelihood that people of color or women have a sponsorship. And we know that when they do have those sponsors, they tend to progress faster and further in organizations. So we also have an initiative that's called Proximity. So it's very similar, but it's focused on leaders getting more proximate to their employees and to their bench. And so, because again, in order to have an employee advance, leaders need to know who you are. So we have a number of initiatives there, and then we also do have a lot of several programs that we are nomination programs. Some are focused on female talent, some are focused on African American talent, like the Executive Leadership Council. We send a lot, folks there every year. So there's a number of other initiatives there that we look to get people involved in from a development perspective. So our sort of three pillars, if we think about the continuum or the spectrum in terms of talent, is hire, develop, engage. And oftentimes we focus on the hire and not the engage and develop. So, we bring people in the front door and then they leave out the back door. So we really are trying to focus more on that retention component as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Stan, do you want to add to that?
Well, I would certainly agree. I just think that this is something that will continue to evolve, and we have to evolve with it and not be so regimented, in a just action plan that may or may not be working, and be willing to tweak it when we need to.
That's excellent. I know as we progress, so you guys already talked about your, employee resource organizations, employee resource groups, but one area as we go to the next topic is really trying to make people feel like they're respected, valued, and supported in the organization. And how can you leverage those employee resource organizations or employee resource groups to help build that sense of belonging? Not only just development piece, but what are we doing to communicate that inclusivity in that process? Lady, you want to start there?
Sure. Yeah, I think for us, I think a lot of the folks that are really active in our EROs take it upon themselves, the employees. Those employees are already in the organization, trying to take an active role in encouragement, in encouraging others to network, right? And some of those necessities that oftentimes we may forget, because at the end of the day, definitely leadership plays a role in career development, but the employee plays a bigger role. And so EROs, I think, or employee resource organizations, I think, play a key role in, like I said, we have, ours are very active in different professional development initiatives, but then also encouraging other folks to network, you need to meet this person, do you have a career plan, do you have brand statements, and some of those different elements that we oftentimes don't think about. If you happen to if a senior leader happens to, you happen to run into a senior leader, or they happen to ask you, for coffee, do you know what's your brand, what's your elevator pitch, and really just sort of thinking ahead of some of those things. So I think in addition to the company and some of the different initiatives, I talked about proximity and sponsorships and some of the things that we're asking leaders to do, I think there's also a strong need on the side of the employee to do their part as well in terms of investing in themselves. And I think if both of those components are built successfully, you meet each other in the middle, and I think that to me is the formula for success.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Aleta. So Stan, pivoting on that, let's talk about initiatives and associations outside of the ERGs, external organizations. What are some of the ones that Gilead's engaged in that is helping to impact your culture?
Yeah, so from a professional organizational kind of focus, I mentioned at the top of the call that I am currently in DC at the National Sales Network conference. And so this is a conference that we are partnering with for our commercial organization. And there are others by function that we, build relationships with. And for us, it really is about building kind of that relationship. I think a lot of companies don't realize that brand equity is a big part of why someone joined your organization. Whether you're talking about the diverse or the majority, it still has to do with your brand equity. And so we really want, to, through those relationships, kind of show the commitment of our organization, but then also at the same time, understand the complex environment that we're in today. We all know, it's just a tough time for organizations. You're dealing with cancel culture, various advocates, social media channels, socially conscious customers. We literally cannot afford to not do right by everyone that we are trying to look after when you think of the talent continuum. And so that's just, something that we will continue to have to carefully manage, because if we truly believe that the number one asset of any company is an individual, then inclusion and diversity equity has to be adopted as a executive and strategic pillar for the organization. I mean, you have to believe that. Otherwise, this is just, activities that may or may not happen.
Absolutely. Aleta, did you want to piggyback on that?
No, I completely agree with what Stan said. It is about, establishing a strong employer brand and what that brand stands for, because again, this talent market probably won't get any less competitive as we move forward. And as it continues to constrict, and as we continue to hopefully try to stay out in front of that and rethink about talent. I agree. I think that yeah, I can't add anything else. I can't add anything else to what's
Okay. No worries there. It's interesting. You both talked about the culture. There was a study that came out with SHRM a few years ago, and obviously before the pandemic, before social justice became a major, focus point. And they said that the reason why a lot of ED&I strategies haven't progressed is because 33% of the companies felt like they've done enough, and it's indifference that really has been, killing, ED&I for so many years. And then I always tell people this is tough work. People don't understand that ED&I, you just can't wake up and just jump into the role. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of passion for it, because it is working and moving forward and shifting cultures and organizations and belief systems that may have been there for many, many, many years. So excellent conversation. Aleta, Stan, I could talk to you all day long, but I also know that I need to make sure we leave room for questions from our audience that have taken time out to listen to us here today. So I believe we're going to transition now to the Q&A session. Let's see what we got going on for questions. Here's a great question about, and I'll just, whichever one wants to take this, but how have you adjusted your employee referral practices to encourage referrals of more diverse talent? Does either one of you want to answer that?
I'm happy to add that we have upped hours. It was $1,500, and now it's $2,500, and now we are working on activating that and communicating the importance of this program. And so that's kind of in play now, but that's something that we really want to tap into and strengthen because we know that that is going to be, and it always has been, when you think of the data and you think of, the source of hire, whether whether employees are doing it or not, that tends to be a high source of hire number that we see. So how do we better incentivize that and really aim it in the target areas that we need is something we'll do moving forward.
Excellent. I think that's a great point there, Stan. And the other piece of it is too, some of these employer referral programs, someone created those 20 years ago and no one's looked at them since. So I think it's also being brought up to current market of what it would cost. I mean, if you think about the referral cost versus the cost of how long that job is empty, it is exponentially better to do the referral than to have that empty seat for that hiring manager in that role and maybe not being able to serve your customers. So excellent point there. The next question I have is, someone asked the question, Stan, you had talked about the cost of a bad hire. They're saying, what is the cost of a bad hire to replace a bad hire? What are some things that go into that cost?
Right. So I think that that number, dependent upon your sector, will vary. If you're highly specialized sector that has hours and hours of training, then that number will be higher. But I think the average cost to train a new employee, the range is about 1,044 to 1,500. That doesn't include the recruiting efforts nor the ramp up to contribution. But if you multiply that number by each regrettable loss that you'll experience, then you'll start to see, what that impact of the bottom line is. And those are small numbers, but I think those are average because not all companies require highly specialized degrees or certificates or what have you. But I think that number that I gave is probably more representative of the broader sectors.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Stan. Aleta, one question came in about, I know you have employer resource organizations, but how do you start that in a smaller company? Cisco is massive, global, but you think about the days of a smaller organization or a little a subsection of Cisco. How do you get an ERO started?
No, I would say, first it takes interest and desire, and then, finding an executive sponsor. So finding some leaders who have a passion toward diversity. And I think if someone is in a smaller organization, they probably know who those folks are. And then having some conversations with a couple of potential sponsors and, determining or confirming that you want to move forward with it, and then developing a charter. And there's several I think resources either online. I think there's even books written about how to start those, but developing the charter and then determining how you're going to get members and that kind of thing. But I think the biggest the first step to me is passion, desire, and then having somebody executive to sponsor.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Aleta. We've got another great question here. So Stan, someone's asking about how do you take your HRTA data to look for gaps in your DE&I strategy when you're looking at recruiting? So bringing in that diverse talent, how is data highlighting those gaps for you? Like, how are you able to quickly find the gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's one that is never ending in terms of how we review kind of that post-mortem look, for each of the requisitions that we have. But even on the front of that, when you think of the hires or the strategy that you need going into next year, for example, we're already planning for next year. So we're already thinking about what we need from a functional perspective, and then we're aligning those TA strategies to kind of meet them. And we already have the representation data in terms of who we have today and how far off or not we are from meeting our objectives that we have. So I do think it's just having those common definitions around what it is we're trying to solve. Sometimes our definition may not be as common as we think it is. And I think that's where we've got to get real diligent on the data and using it to do what it is that we need to do with it versus having a lot of broader conversations that don't lead to hiring. So it's really isolating, what it is we're trying to solve. If it's representation, if it's a level, If it's the hiring process itself that caused fallout, looking at where folks fall out of the funnel, for example. So I think it's all inclusive, but that is how we're looking at data to ensure that we have the right practices, the right process, the right strategy. And if we're not getting the outcome, then we do that postmortem to really understand, what is it that's preventing us, from attracting that talent.
That's great. Thank you for that, Stan. Aleta, one of the things I think that's important is looking at pre and post hiring metrics on ED&I. Are you surveying some of the diverse talent once they come to Cisco? Like, how are we measuring uh, their impact or their experience once they've been hired on?
Yeah, I think most of any work that we're doing in terms of surveying is probably being done through our employee resource organizations, or it's not. I wouldn't say it's as formalized. So prior to uh, prior to I think we announced our social justice actions. I want to say last May, and then prior to that, our CEO um, went through a process where he actually pulled in groups of different folks. So there were African American groups or Hispanic Latino groups, and talked about the experience at Cisco and just where we're doing well, where we're not doing well. And then that feedback was actually used to inform some of our actions around social justice and some of the things that we're driving now. But I think in terms of being formal and just going to particular groups, there's probably I can't think of anything that we're doing ongoing outside of say exit interviews and things like that when people leave, which is probably not exactly the time you want to do it. But I think a lot of the work that we're doing around surveying in terms of experience is probably more around the employee resource organizations that would be sponsored by those organizations.
Thank you for that, Aleta. Stan, did you want to add to that? Surveying the diverse talent?
I would just say ours is evolving in that space. I think there's a obvious interest in collecting that information, and it's just how. And I think depending upon the group, it happens. It may happen a different way, but the data is being collected and actioned on.
Thank you for that. So, Aleta and Stan, both of you had great ED&I programs, initiatives, great talent acquisition processes in place. Do you extend any of the things that you're doing for diverse talent to your contingent labor or subcontractors? Some of the programs that you have in your organization?
So our employee resource organizations, any of the efforts that are offered there are definitely available. Some of the more formal programs, like the sponsorships or some of the attending some of those conferences, I talked about executive leadership council and things like that. Those would then have to be facilitated by the contractor employer, if you will. So things that are done internally, again, mainly with the EROs, are definitely the employment group.
Thank you for that, Aleta. Stan, what about you? I know one of the things that work with Gilead that in the TA, we support Gilead from a TA perspective, in that there's been a lot of great trainings that you've extended to our organization. What about other contractors within Gilead?
Yeah, I would say it's similar. I think obviously there's that compliance, angle that we have to maintain, but where we can, we certainly do. And we believe that that fosters, that partnership that we need to make folks feel that they're part of the team. And that's something that we continue to assess. And we appreciate, the feedback we get from our partnership with Randstad, because that's something that will certainly help us, be better together. So we're happy about that.
Well, Aleta and Stan, as always, you guys are such a wealth of knowledge and powerhouses in the ED&I space. It's been such a treat to be with you here today. Um, we're going to next talk about some upcoming opportunities for people to stay in contact with us. I think the first and foremost is we have a QR code. We would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. If you want to scan our QR code for Stan, Aleta Howell, or myself, we'd love for you to follow up and let us know what you thought about our chat today. Next, also HRCI. There is some of you that if you're looking for a certification credit, the program ID number is 572217. You'll get one general certification credit with HRCI. I know I always have to keep up with my credits, so I certainly appreciate that. So make sure you take note of that so that you can get credit for today's session towards your HRCI certifications. And then finally, we do have a upcoming, steps or another event that you can learn more about, overcoming the global talent shortage. And then we've got a webinar with Michael. I'm sorry. And then we have a webinar with Michael Johnson coming up with on November 11th, 2021. He's one of the greatest athletes of all time. He's going to talk about a winning mindset and performance strategy. So make sure you scan that QR code to get more information on that. So we certainly appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you again, Aleta and Stan, and thank you for Cisco and Gilead for the great work you're doing in the ED&I space. And I think that wraps us up today.